Okay, I'm getting ready to put the rocker boxes on now. So I've put well seal around where the rocker boxes are going to sit. I've put the push rods in, and at the top and the bottom of the push rod I've actually put in some engine assembly lube. Not that I need it, because this engine obviously is it's got oil in it now, so it's not dry anymore. But I put that in because that acts as like a glue, so that when the rockers and that make contact with the push rods, they're going to like stick in and not jump out. And then sometimes you tighten the rockers down, you realise that you know it's not seated properly. So I put that in as like a glue. I've also put a little bit of well seal down these threads, these three at the front and these three at the back, because they're the Allen screws. We'll see those in a minute. They go through there, and oil can leak down the threads and come out the bottom here. So I've actually put well seal in those threads as well. In a minute, I'm going to put the push rod tubes over the push rods, and then the gasket, and then we'll put the rocker boxes on. So here are the rocker boxes themselves. Again, I've put well seal where the gasket's going, and also around where the push rod, the top of the push rods, is going to sit on the push rod, on the rocker boxes. Note that they're different. That's marked I for inlet, and the other one, you can't turn the other way, it's marked EX for exhaust. Okay, then in the, I don't know if I can turn this over. So then these are where those three Allen screws go, that, you know, okay. Now underneath the head of the Allen screws, there are these little aluminium washers. Now these are the old ones that I prized out. And again, on this side, I've got the new ones ready to go in, and the old ones that I've prized out. The thing is that when you're taking things apart, they sit in these holes, those aluminium washers, but they're the same colour, of course, as the rocker boxes themselves. And it's very difficult to work out whether there's still a washer in there that needs prizing out, or whether it's the actual body of the rocker box cover. But do make sure that you have prized them out. Otherwise, I have seen 2 or even 3 washers still being sat in there where people haven't realised, and they've put a washer on top of a washer, and the chances are it'll almost certainly leak. So you want new washers. And as I've said, what I also do is put well seal down the threads, so that if any oil does get past these, then it's stopped by the threads. Because especially the exhaust rocker box, they sit in oil, because the way that the engine's tilted forwards on a T160, the oil runs forward and it sits above the heads of those Allen screws, and it just sits there. And if it's not totally sealed, it will slowly seep down, and as I say, it won't leak out of the seal, it will leak out of here, but it will actually come out the threads. So it's very important to get a good seal there. Is that about it? I think so. Yeah, we've got the push rod tubes. I've got the top seals on, made sure that they're sitting neatly, they're not like rolled over as I've pulled them on. I've put a very small smear of well seal on the bottom and on the tops. Again, so these I'll put these in a minute, and they'll sit in the barrels ready for the rockers to go on. Okay, so we'll do that. I'll get the push rods that are tubes on, and we'll get the gaskets on, and then we'll get ready to fit the actual rocker boxes. Okay, so I've loosely got the rocker boxes on. So I've put in I put them on, and then we have the inspection caps off the back, and using a magnet on the top of the push rods, I don't know, you probably can't see, but you can use that magnet on the top of the push rods to sort of like maneuver them into position, and then locate the rockers into the top of the push rod. And then I put these the 4 7/16 rocker bolts, the corner bolts in, just to hold everything in position, and then I've put these in finger tight. Note a couple of things, that the 2 sort of outer bolts are slightly longer than the 2 inner bolts. if you notice, they're slightly higher up, and so they're very slightly longer. You can see on this side, you see they're on like a little raised platform, and the two middle ones are lower. So the longer ones go to the outside. And the other thing, which of course I forgot myself, is that on the T160, because it's canted forwards, this bolt fouls on the top frame. So I put everything in, then I tried to put that bolt in and it won't go in, the cylinder head stud. So I had to take the whole damn thing off again, sort of jig everything sideways, get the bolt down so it was past the frame, and then relocate everything. So everything's now loosely in position. And so I'm now going to tighten things down, bearing in mind, of course, that there's a big difference in height because this valve will be fully open. So as this screws down, it will be pushing the valve open. So some valves are open, some are closed. So you'll be very careful, because if you're not careful, you could warp or even possibly crack the rocker boxes, because that side's got no tension because the valve's open. This side's full tension because the valve's closed rather at that end. The valve's open at this end, so as you screw it down, it's going to be pushing the valve open. And if you just screw that down first and then this, obviously you're putting a huge amount of tension on this end. So you've got to screw things down evenly and carefully. And then we'll be doing the torquing up the rocker box, the cylinder head bolts, but only when we've got everything down even and flat. Oh, and of course I need to put the 3 Allen screws with those aluminium crush washers in position as well. I'll do that now, and then we'll start tightening everything down. Right, there we go, all on and done. So I gradually tightened the rocker boxes down to make sure they weren't unduly stressed, because this valve was open, so the whole rocker box was up at this end, and if you're not careful, you could easily crack the rocker box, I think, or certainly damage it. So I gently tightened everything down and tightened the Allens down at the same time, and then I checked through the inspection caps that all the rockers, the back end of the rockers, was still engaged with the push rods. And as it happened, yes, it was in fact this push rod here, the center for the center piston on the exhaust. I looked through, and in fact it had jumped out, so the rocker wasn't engaged with the top of the push rod. Now I was lucky that the position the engine was in, that I was able to unscrew the adjuster just so there was just enough room when I lifted the rocker to get the push rod back underneath and re-engage it, before I turned over. Because what happens is, if you're not careful, if you turn the engine over with it disengaged, the rocker will actually wedge itself against the side of the push rod tube. It'll jam, and then you're in all sorts of trouble. So really, you don't want to be, if it's not engaged, then you've got to try and engage it before turning the engine over. In this case, we were able to undo the adjuster. If I hadn't had that much, if I hadn't been able to do that, and it still wasn't enough to get the rocker high enough to get the pusher underneath it, then I'd have to loosen all the rocker box off again, re-engage it, and then tighten it all down again. But luckily I didn't have to do that. Now I've turned the engine over a couple of times. I don't know, it's a bit stiff, so no, I can't, because no. But I have now turned it over a couple of times, and what I've been doing is checking that the rockers have all been going up and down, which they have been, both inlet and exhaust. So I know that they're all properly seated, and I keep checking in the back here to check that none of them have jumped out. Yeah, so they're all okay. So and these are just tightened down roughly. So what I'm going to do next, I will then tighten the head studs down properly, and when they're torqued down properly, then we'll readjust the tappets, which I'm hoping should be there or thereabouts, because we haven't adjusted them, apart from that one I had to loosen off. We haven't adjusted them that much since I did them before. But obviously everything needs to be torqued down, so I'll torque everything down, then re-tighten these Allen screws. They take a fair bit of tightening, because of course they've got a crush washer underneath them, so it does crush down that washer. It's tight, but you can keep tightening it as the washer crushes down. don't over tighten these 4 corner ones, because they only do the rocker box. They don't go through into the cylinders as the main cylinder head bolts do. Okay, yeah. Phew. Anyway, it's on. Everything seems to be okay. Like I said, I've turned it over a few times and I've watched the valves go up and down, so everything seems okay. We'll torque everything down, recheck the gap on the tappets, then put these inspection caps back on when I'm happy that everything is engaged and everything's working fine, and then we'll be able to carry on with reassembling the rest of the engine. Well, that should be most of the engine done. Then we've got to put the carbs back on, we've got to put the oil cooler back on, we've got to put the exhaust system back on, and obviously the tank, side panel, it's just all the accessories really. After this, the actual engine itself is done. Oof. But what I'll do is I will connect the electrics back up and I'll turn it over on the starter, because then everything's, just to check that everything is absolutely right. Because turning it over by hand, you only get a bit, but on the starter we'll be able to see it, going properly, and I can just check everything is absolutely fine before carrying on. Okay, so I've torqued the head down now to a good 18, I would say, getting near 20. Because I'm using a composite gasket, it does free up pretty soon after starting. So I always just, err on the side of tightness for the first tighten down, because I know that it will free up pretty rapidly after starting. And then we'll torque it back down. I've adjusted all the tappets, 6 inlet, 8 exhaust, which is what I do. Some people do 8 and 10. I do 6 and 8. Then I've I've connected the starter motor back up, and I've turned the engine over and just checked that all the tappets, everything was working fine with the rockers and that. And then I've put these caps on. Now I'm totally sure that the rockers are all engaged at the back with the push rods. So I put them on with the aid of this simple little tool, which slots into the slot, and then you put a spanner on it so you can tighten them right up. Because some of you will know that when on my T160, after I rebuilt it, I had an annoying oil leak. And it was just here, like around the top of the crankcase. And it drove me mad. So basically, I couldn't work out what it was. So I thought it was a pushrod tubes. And so I took all the head off and did them. No, it wasn't them. So then I took the head off and all the barrels, because I thought it was the rocker box. This gasket here at the bottom of the cylinder barrel base gasket. Anyway, basically, it turned out it wasn't that. All it was one of these was leaking, because I hadn't changed the rubber seal that goes on them, and it was leaking and going down the fins on the head, then running down to the back of the pushrod tubes, because of course they line up perfectly with the pushrod tubes, going down the back of the pushrod tubes, and then sneaking out down here. And so it took me months and months, and all it was that it just needed new rubber seal, because I hadn't replaced the rubber seal for reasons best known to myself on these inspection caps, and that's what was leaking. And that took, a simple thing like that took me months, because it's so hard to work out where oil is coming out, and I was convinced it was coming out. That's why you could see the oil, but it was actually leaking up here. Right, yeah. So I've adjusted the tappets, put those on, connected that back up. So I'll just turn it over a bit, just for us to have a look at. Let's have a look, turn the ignition on, and I'll spin it over on the starter a bit. Good. Oh, nice. So we know we're okay in that respect. And so what's the next thing? I'm going to put the carbs back on next. we're slowly getting there. Carbs back on, then it'll probably be the damned oil cool. Well, I'll put the covers back on, the tappet covers back on. Carbs, oil cooler, and then pipes, then tank, and then we're just about done.